In this video, we'll take a look at all the death row inmates executed in the United States in 2023. We'll explore their crimes, the details of their trials, their final words, and even their last meals. Welcome to Criminal Records. Robert Allen Fratta, State, Texas. In 1994, 33-year-old Farrah Fratta was shot to death in the garage of her home in Atascocita, Texas. The murder shocked the community, and for months there were no clear answers. However, as the investigation progressed, a chilling plan was uncovered. Her estranged husband, Robert Allen Fratta, a former police officer, had orchestrated the killing during a bitter divorce and custody battle over their children. Fratta didn't carry out the murder himself. He hired a neighbor, Joseph Andrew Pristash, to coordinate the hit. Pristash, in turn, recruited an 18-year-old named Howard Paul Guidry to pull the trigger. The link between the three was discovered when Guidry was arrested for an unrelated bank robbery. During questioning, details emerged that tied him to Farrah Fratta's murder, which led to the arrests of both Pristash and Fratta. All three were tried separately and sentenced to death for capital murder. Over the years, Robert Fratta maintained his innocence. However, his appeals were repeatedly denied. On January 10, 2023, Robert Fratta was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit. He offered no final words. One of his children, from his marriage to Farrah, witnessed the execution, along with one of Farrah's relatives. Fratta was pronounced dead at 7:49 p.m., becoming the first person executed in Texas that year. Joseph Pristash and Howard Guidry remain on death row, awaiting the outcomes of their respective appeals. Scott Eizember, State, Oklahoma. In 2003, Scott Eizember broke into the home of AJ and Patsy Cantrell, an elderly couple living in Depew, Oklahoma. He was waiting for his ex-girlfriend, who lived across the street. During the break-in, he beat 76-year-old AJ to death and then shot 70-year-old Patsy. He was also convicted of shooting his ex-girlfriend's son and assaulting her mother. Eizember was sentenced to death for AJ's murder and received a 150-year prison sentence for killing Patsy. In 2015, a federal court upheld his sentence. The Supreme Court denied his appeal in 2016. During his clemency hearing in 2022, Eizember said, "My place is in prison. I offer sincere apologies to all the victims." The Pardon and Parole Board voted 3-2 against granting clemency. On January 12, 2023, he was executed by lethal injection. His last meal was a ribeye steak with French fries. His final words were, "I'm at peace. My conscience is clear. I love my children." He spent 20 years on death row before his execution. Wesley Ruiz, State, Texas. In 2007, in Dallas, Texas, Wesley Ruiz was pursued by police after being suspected of driving a vehicle linked to a homicide. At the end of the chase, Officer Mark Nix tried to break Ruiz's car window with his baton. Ruiz shot and killed him. During his trial, Ruiz claimed he acted in self-defense because he feared for his life. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. Over the years, his attorneys filed multiple appeals, all of which were unsuccessful. Shortly before his execution, they submitted an emergency appeal alleging racial bias by a juror. One juror reportedly referred to Ruiz as an animal and described the Hispanic individuals present as gang members. The Supreme Court declined to halt the execution. Wesley Ruiz was executed by lethal injection on February 1, 2023. These were his final words. "I would like to apologize to Mark and the Nix family. I didn't know him, and I had no intention to hurt anyone. I hope you can find peace with this. To my family and friends around the world, thank you for your support. To my children, stay strong and continue to make me proud. Don't worry about me. I'll be okay. I'm ready to go." He spent 16 years on death row before his execution. Leonard Raheem Taylor, State, Misuri. In 2004, Leonard Raheem Taylor was convicted of murdering his girlfriend, Angela Rowe, and her 3 children, Alexis, Acrea, and Tyrese Conley, at their home in a suburb of St. Louis. The bodies were discovered on December 3rd, but the county medical examiner later revised the estimated time of death, concluding the murders had occurred 2 to 3 weeks earlier. Taylor consistently maintained his innocence, claiming he was in California at the time of the killings. His attorneys presented evidence to support his alibi, including witness testimony and an independent forensic analysis that challenged the official timeline. Despite their efforts, Missouri Governor Mike Parson denied clemency. On February 7, 2023, Taylor was executed by lethal injection at the Monteil State Prison. He was pronounced dead at 6:16 p.m. His final meal was served at 11 a.m. that day: a seafood platter, a cheeseburger, French fries, cheesecake, and vanilla ice cream. In his final statement before the execution, he said, "Muslims don't die. We live eternally in the hearts of our families and friends. Death is not your enemy, it's your destiny. Embrace it. Peace." Leonard Taylor spent nearly 19 years on death row. John Lezell Balentine, State, Texas. In the early hours of January 21, 1998, in Amarillo, Texas, John Lezell Balentine broke into a home while its occupants were sleeping. Armed with a .32 caliber pistol, he shot 3 white teenagers in the head as they slept: Edward Mark Kaler, 17, Kai Brooke Geyer, 15, Stephen Brady Watson, 15. All 3 victims were asleep when they were killed. One of them, Mark Kaler, was the brother of Balentine's ex-girlfriend. According to court records, Kaler had previously threatened Balentine because of his interracial relationship with Kaler's sister. Balentine, a black man, was arrested, confessed to the murders, and was convicted of capital murder in 1999. He was sentenced to death. For years, his attorneys argued that the trial was tainted by racial bias, claiming it influenced the jury's decision to impose the death penalty. They alleged that at least one juror had a history of racism. On February 8, 2023, after numerous appeals and a brief delay due to procedural issues, Balentine was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison in Texas. He was pronounced dead at 6:36 p.m. In his final statement, Balentine said, "I want to thank everyone. I love you for supporting me. I want to apologize for the hurt I caused. Forgive me. I'm ready." Balentine spent nearly 25 years on death row. Donald David Dillbeck, State, Florida. In 1979, at the age of 15, Donald Dillbeck murdered a sheriff's deputy while fleeing from police in Fort Myers Beach, Florida. He was sentenced to life in prison for that crime. Years later, in 1990, he escaped from prison for the second time. While on the run, Dillbeck murdered 44-year-old Faye Van in a mall parking lot in Tallahassee, stabbing her repeatedly with a knife he had stolen. The attack happened during an attempted carjacking. He was arrested, tried, and convicted in 1991 of first-degree murder, armed robbery, and burglary. He was sentenced to death, in addition to 2 life sentences on top of the one he was already serving. His parents testified that Donald had suffered brain damage and childhood abuse. Governor Ron DeSantis signed his death warrant. Dillbeck was executed by lethal injection on February 23, 2023, at Florida State Prison. He was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. He was 59 years old. His final meal included fried shrimp, mushrooms, onion rings, chocolate pecan pie, and ice cream. When asked for his final words, he said, "I know I hurt people when I was young. I really messed up. But I know Ron DeSantis has done far worse. He's taken a lot from a lot of people. I speak for all men, women, and children. He's put his foot on our necks. Ron DeSantis and people like him can suck our dicks." Gary Green, State, Texas. In 2009, 38-year-old Gary Green brutally murdered his wife and her daughter in their home in Dallas, Texas. On September 21st, he stabbed Lavetta Armstead, 32, multiple times and drowned 6-year-old Jasmine Montgomery in a bathtub. After the killings, Green told his 2 sons, ages 12 and 9, that he would let them live, then fled the scene. The children called 911 and ran to a neighbor for help. Green later confessed to the murders during a police interrogation. He was tried and convicted of capital murder in 2010 and sentenced to death. He remained on death row at the Huntsville State Penitentiary as multiple appeals were denied. On March 7, 2023, Gary Green was executed by lethal injection. The execution was carried out at 7:07 p.m. He was 51 years old. Before his death, Green left a final written statement. "Vetta, Jared, Ray, I'm sorry. No, I'm not sorry. I apologize for all the harm I've caused you and your family. We ate together, broke bread together, laughed and cried as a family. I'm sorry I failed you. There's nothing I can do. I took not one, but two people that we all loved, and I had to live with that while I was here. I ask that you forgive me, not for me, but for you. I'm done, Warden." Arthur Brown, Jr. State, Texas. In 1992, 20-year-old Arthur Brown Jr. was accused of participating in a quadruple murder linked to drug trafficking in Houston, Texas. According to the prosecution, Brown, along with two accomplices, went to the home of their drug supplier. There, they bound 6 people and shot them in the back of the head. 4 of the victims died, including a minor and a pregnant woman. 2 victims survived. Brown was arrested 4 months later and sentenced to death in 1994. His accomplices were also convicted. One was executed in 2006, and the other is serving a life sentence. Throughout the process, Brown maintained his innocence. His defense argued that he had an intellectual disability and that his conviction was based on unreliable testimony. They attempted to halt the execution by presenting new DNA evidence, but the appeals were denied. On March 9, 2023, Brown was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville State Prison in Texas. He was pronounced dead at 6:37 p.m. He was 52 years old. In his final statement, he said, "What's happening here tonight is not justice. It's the murder of an innocent man for a murder that happened in 1992. Luis Gaskin, State, Florida. In 1989, Luis Bernard Gaskin, known as the Ninja Killer, committed a brutal double murder in Palm Coast, Florida. Dressed in a black ninja suit to avoid being identified, on the night of December 20th, he approached the home of Robert and Georgette Sturmfels. From a rear window, Gaskin fired 5 shots at Robert, killing him in his chair. He then shot Georgette. Since she was still alive, he reloaded the gun and shot her in the head, killing her. A few hours later, he went to the home of Joseph and Mary Rector. He shot from the outside, injuring Joseph. When the couple hid in a closet, Gaskin broke the window and shot from inside the house as they fled to their car. Fortunately, he missed. The Rectors managed to escape and get help. A few days later, Gaskin's girlfriend's cousin turned him in. He said that Luis had come home after the murders and mentioned that he was wrapping gifts, which later turned out to be stolen items from the Sturmfels. He was arrested on December 30th, 1989, and after a recorded confession, admitted to killing because he had the desire to kill. He also confessed to the 1986 murder of Charles Martin Miller. In July 1990, he was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to death twice. He spent 34 years on death row. Governor Ron DeSantis signed his execution order in March 2023. Luis Gaskin was executed by lethal injection on April 12, 2023, at 6:15 p.m. at the Florida State Prison. He was 56 years old. His last meal consisted of BBQ pork ribs, buffalo wings, turkey neck, shrimp fried rice, French fries, and water. He had no spiritual advisor. His sister visited him before his death. No family members of the victims attended the execution. Before dying, Gaskin said, "It's not about the crime or the criminal. It's about the law. Look at my case." Darryl Barwick, State, Florida. In 1986, Darryl B. Barwick brutally murdered 24-year-old Rebecca Went in her apartment in Panama City, Florida. He followed her after seeing her sunbathing outdoors and forcibly entered her apartment. Barwick confessed that he attempted to rob her, but when she resisted, he stabbed her 37 times while she tried to defend herself. The crime occurred less than 3 months after Barwick was released from prison, where he had served time for the knife-point rape of a 21-year-old woman. In his confession, he stated that he killed Went because he didn't want to go back to prison. In November 1986, he was convicted of first-degree murder, armed robbery, and attempted sexual assault. The jury voted 9-3 in favor of the death penalty. However, in 1989, the Florida Supreme Court overturned the conviction due to prosecutorial misconduct. In a new trial in 1992, he was once again convicted and sentenced to death, this time unanimously. On May 3, 2023, Darryl Barwick was executed by lethal injection at 6:14 p.m. at Florida State Prison. He was 56 years old and had spent 37 years on death row. His execution was the 102nd in Florida since 1976. His last meal, served at 9:15 a.m., consisted of fried chicken, macaroni and cheese, black-eyed peas, rice, and cornbread, a typical Southern meal. In his final words, Barwick said, "It's time to apologize to the victim's family, to my family. I can't explain why I did what I did. And one more thing I'd like to say. The state of Florida needs to show compassion and kindness to each other. With so many young people in prison, there are young people, 14 and 15 years old, serving life sentences." Michael Tisius, State, Missouri. In 2000, Michael Tisius, just 19 years old, murdered 2 prison guards during a failed escape attempt in Randolph County, Missouri. On June 22nd of that year, Tisius, who was about to be released, had planned to help his cellmate, Roy Vance, escape. Throughout their time in prison, they had discussed a plan in which, once outside, Tisius would return armed to assist the escape. Tisius, armed with a pistol, entered the jail, shooting and killing guards Leon Egley and Jason Acton. However, the escape attempt failed, and Tisius was arrested shortly afterward. During the trial, the defense argued that Tisius had a difficult childhood, marked by abandonment and the lack of a stable parental figure, leaving him emotionally immature. Despite this, he was sentenced to death. After spending 23 years on death row, Michael Tisius was executed on June 6, 2023, at 42 years old, by lethal injection at the Monteil State Prison in Missouri. The day before his execution, Tisius was served a final meal consisting of 2 cheeseburgers with bacon, curly fries, regular fries, and a chocolate milkshake. Before his execution, Tisius addressed those present with the following words: "I hold firmly to my faith. It's all I have left. I regret that it had to come to this point. I wish I could have fixed things while I was still here. I truly tried to be a better person. I worked hard to give everything I could to everyone I could. I tried to forgive others as I hope to be forgiven, and I pray to God to forgive those who condemn me, just as He forgave those who condemned Him. I'm sorry, and not because it's the end, but because I truly am. And I need to tell you that I love you, Trufa. Out Seacrest. Duane Eugene Owen. State, Florida." In 1984, Duane Eugene Owen committed 2 brutal murders in southern Florida. On March the 24th, he attacked and killed 14-year-old Karen Slattery, who was working as a babysitter in Delray Beach. 2 months later, on May 29th, he entered the home of 38-year-old Georgiana Warden in Boca Raton and also took her life. He was arrested the day after the second murder for an unrelated robbery, and during questioning, he confessed to both murders, along with other serious crimes. Owen was sentenced to death for both cases in separate trials, and was also given 3 consecutive life sentences. After nearly 40 years on death row, Duane Eugene Owen was executed on June 15, 2023, at 62 years old, by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison. Before his execution, Owen requested a cheeseburger with bacon, no bun, onion rings, strawberries, cherry ice cream, a vanilla milkshake, and coffee. Though he did not speak in his final moments before execution, he left behind a written note that said, "I have transcended space and time. I have seen the visions of the crow. My energy and my particles will infinitely transform. I will remain alive. I am Tula, 13 inches, Jemaine Cannon. State, Oklahoma." In 1995, Jemaine Cannon killed Sharonda White Clark in her home in Tulsa. At the time, Cannon had recently escaped from a work center where he was serving a sentence for an assault on an 18-year-old woman in 1990. Authorities indicated that Cannon had been transferred to the minimum security center due to overcrowding in maximum security facilities. He was executed on July 20, 2023, by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma. He was 51 years old and had spent nearly 3 decades on death row. His last meal included chicken breast, sliced beef skirt steak, seasoned fries, fried okra, sweet and smoked beans, cherry pie, and Werner's ginger ale. When asked if he had anything to say, he responded, "Yes, I confess with my mouth and believe in my heart that God raised Jesus from the dead. Therefore, I am saved. Thank you." His execution was witnessed by the victim's eldest daughter, who commented, "In my opinion, he died very favorably. Unfortunately, my mother didn't have that opportunity." James Barber. State, Alabama. In 2001, James Barber murdered Dorothy Epps in her home in Harvest, Alabama, by repeatedly hitting her with a hammer. After the murder, Barber fled with the victim's purse. He was sentenced to death and spent over 20 years on death row. On June 22, 2023, Barber was executed by lethal injection at 1:56 a.m. in the Alabama State Prison after filing several legal appeals to stop his execution. In his final statement, Barber said, "I want to tell the Epps family that I love you. I am sorry for what happened. There are no words that can describe how I feel. And to the people in this room, I forgive you for what you are about to do." Initially, Barber had requested to read a written statement, but he was not allowed to hold the paper because he was strapped to the gurney. His written statement, later published by his law firm, expressed, "Words alone cannot express my pain for what happened at my hands." During the execution, Barber was accompanied by a spiritual advisor. After saying his final words, the drugs were administered. His eyes closed and his breathing slowed until he was no longer visible. His last meal consisted of loaded hash browns, an omelet, spicy sausage, and toast. Johnny Johnson. State, Misuri. In 2002, Johnny Johnson abducted and murdered 6-year-old Casey Williamson in a brutal crime involving attempted sexual assault, followed by bludgeoning her to death with a brick and a large stone. Afterward, he dragged her body to a nearby river and confessed his actions the same day. Johnson was sentenced to death, and despite appeals from his lawyers who argued that his schizophrenia made him mentally incompetent to be executed, the U.S. Supreme Court dismissed the appeal. On June 19, 2023, Johnny Johnson was executed by lethal injection at the Bonne State Prison, Missouri. His final meal consisted of a hamburger, curly fries, and a strawberry milkshake. He was pronounced dead at 6:33 p.m. CT. During his final statement, Johnson apologized to the victim's family, saying, "God bless you. I am sorry for the people and the family that I hurt." Several family members of the victim witnessed the execution, which took place amidst strong controversy due to objections from his defenders regarding his mental health. James Philip Barnes. State, Florida. James Philip Barnes was an American serial killer who, in 1988, raped and murdered Patricia Miller. While serving a life sentence for the murder of his wife in 1997, Barnes confessed to other crimes, including the murder of Patricia Miller in 2005, after converting to Islam and wanting to cleanse his conscience. He also confessed his involvement in 2 unsolved murders, those of Chester Wetmore and Brenda Fletcher, although he was not charged with these crimes. Barnes was sentenced to death, and on June 22, 2023, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed the death warrant. After a hearing on June 27, 2023, Barnes accepted responsibility for his crimes and requested that his sentence be carried out without delay. On August 3, 2023, James Barnes was executed by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison at the age of 61, and he was declared dead at 6:13 p.m. He was offered the opportunity to make a final statement but remained silent and refused both a final meal and visits before his execution. Anthony Sánchez, State, Oklahoma. In 1996, Anthony Sánchez raped and murdered 21-year-old Julie Buskin, a dance student. The case remained unsolved for years until DNA found at the crime scene matched Sánchez's while he was imprisoned for a robbery. Sánchez maintained his innocence until the end and protested his lack of guilt as he was strapped into the death chamber. Despite this, he chose not to make a clemency request to the state parole board, which many viewed as his final opportunity to save his life. Before being executed, Sánchez expressed disagreement with his former lawyers and thanked his supporters, including his spiritual advisor, who was with him in the death chamber. His final words were, "I am innocent. I did not kill anyone." He was declared dead 11 minutes after the lethal drugs were administered. Michael Duane Zack III. State, Florida. Michael Duane Zack III was convicted for the murders of 2 women, Lori Rosillo and Ravone Smith, in June 1996 in Florida. Zack strangled Rosillo on Okaloosa Island and left her body on the beach. The next day, he met Smith at Pensacola Beach, sexually assaulted her, and then fatally stabbed her. He was arrested 2 days later and incarcerated for Rosillo's murder, while receiving the death penalty for Smith's murder. Zack spent 27 years in prison, during which he met his wife, learned to read and write, and made several pen pals. In the early morning of October 3, 2023, at the age of 54, he was executed by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison, 27 years after the murders. He declined a final meal and was visited by his wife and spiritual advisor. When asked for his final words, he said, "I love everyone." He was declared dead at 6:14 p.m., minutes after the lethal drugs were administered. Jedidiah Murphy, State, Texas. In October 2000, Jedidiah Murphy stole a car and shot and killed 80-year-old Bertie Lee Cunningham in Garland, Texas. Cunningham had gone out shopping, and when she didn't return, her sister reported her missing. It was later discovered that Murphy had forced Cunningham to drive him in her car, placed her in the trunk, shot her in the head, and then dumped her body in a creek. He used Cunningham's credit cards to buy alcohol and cigarettes. Murphy was arrested and confessed to the crime, leading police to Cunningham's body. He was convicted of capital murder in 2001. On October 10, 2023 at 9:50 p.m., he received a lethal injection at the Texas State Prison. During his final statement, Murphy, visibly emotional, said, "To the victim's family, I sincerely apologize for all of this. I hope this helps, if possible, to bring closure." The execution was witnessed by his friend, a family friend of Cunningham, and a spiritual advisor who was with him during the process. Murphy was declared dead at 10:15 p.m. Brent Ray Brewer, State, Texas. In April 1990, Brent Ray Brewer, at 19 years old, murdered 66-year-old Robert Laminack during a robbery in Amarillo. Brewer and his girlfriend attacked Laminack, stabbing him in the neck after stealing $140. Brewer was arrested and sentenced to death in 1990. On October 12, 2023, Brewer was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville State Penitentiary. He was declared dead at 6:39 p.m. local time, 15 minutes after the pentobarbital dose was administered. Before his execution, Brewer said, "I would like to tell the victim's family that I never found the words to fix what I broke. I just want you to know that this 53-year-old man is not the same reckless 19-year-old from 1990. I hope you find peace, and I mean that sincerely." The execution proceeded after the U.S. Supreme Court rejected an appeal about false and unscientific expert testimony used in his trial. Brewer spent more than 33 years in prison. David Santiago Renteria, State, Texas. In 2001, David Santiago Renteria was convicted of the kidnapping, rape, and murder of 5-year-old Alexandra Flores. After killing her, Renteria burned her body. He was arrested and sentenced to death, spending over 20 years in prison. On November 16, 2023, Renteria was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville State Penitentiary. Before his execution, Renteria sang a religious song and said to the victim's family, "There is not a day I don't think about what I did. There are no words to describe what you are going through." In his final statement, he expressed, "I regret all the evil I've done, and to those who have asked for my death, to those about to kill me, I forgive you." Casey McWhorter, State, Alabama. In 1994, at 18 years old, Casey McWhorter was convicted of the murder of Lee Williams in Marshall County. During his trial, McWhorter did not receive adequate representation due to his inability to hire a private lawyer, and the public defenders failed to investigate his childhood and development, including the effects of substance use from a young age. Additionally, the prosecution failed to disclose evidence that indicated McWhorter did not fire the fatal shots, which impacted the reliability of the trial. Despite these factors, McWhorter was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death. He was executed by lethal injection in Alabama. For his last meal, McWhorter requested turtles, a mix of chocolate, pecans, and caramel. Before his execution, McWhorter addressed the witnesses. "I want to say that I love my mother and my family. I want to say to the victim's family that I'm sorry. I hope you have found peace." He also made an accusation against the prison warden, calling him a habitual abuser of women, and making sure everyone knew about the allegations before his execution. Phillip Dean Hancock, State, Oklahoma. In 1982, Phillip Dean Hancock was convicted of the murder of Charles Lester Warren, a drug dealer, a crime he claimed was committed in self-defense. Hancock was sentenced to 4 years for first-degree involuntary manslaughter. However, in 2001, Hancock committed a double homicide, killing James Vincent Lynch III and Robert Lee Jett Jr., again claiming self-defense. Despite his defense, he was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Hancock maintained his version of events throughout the post-conviction appeals process, but was ultimately executed by lethal injection on November 30, 2023. After Oklahoma Governor Stitt denied his clemency request. Before being executed, Hancock expressed his gratitude to his attorneys and continued to insist on his innocence regarding the double murder. He also strongly criticized the prosecution, stating, "They're vile, they have no virtues, they have no honor." For his last meal, he requested a bucket of fried chicken, dark meat, no sides, from KFC and root beer.